Hi, my name is Doug Berkey. I'm with the Air Force Association. I appreciate all of you being here today. I'm truly honored to be with these individuals at this table. Their contribution to the nation cannot be overstated. In World War II, their contribution with providing air superiority, close air support, and other elements with their fighter aircraft truly enabled victory. And if you look at what they contributed in the tactical and strategy realm, they defined fighter aviation for subsequent generations, and we're still employing tactics these gentlemen devised in the heat of battle. And so I'd like to welcome them all here. It's quite a spread of experience. And the first question I have, gentlemen, is that as we look at World War II, one of the unique elements of it is that you were all young kids, basically, when things started, when the attack at Pearl Harbor happened. And you're thrown into training in rapid order. And if you could just talk what that was like, that experience.
Well, I remember 1939 very well. Getting out of high school, I wanted to be a pilot. And I didn't realize you had to have 2 years of college, but I was going to be a pilot anyway. I joined the Air Force and went through mechanics training, which turned out to be a wonderful background for flying. And so World War II started for me in 1 week out of high school in '39. And I actually had the greatest desire to fly, and I finally made it. It took a couple years, and I'll never have any regrets on doing what I did to join the Army Air Force in that time period. People wondered why I did it, I'm sure, but it became the best career that anybody could ever have hoped for. And so flying is something that once it gets in your inner peace, it's something that we all just can't satisfy until we've done it all. And I had the opportunity to be in flight testing at Dayton, Ohio, for 7 years, where I got to fly 147 different airplanes in a matter of 4 years, including German and Japanese aircraft to evaluate. So I had the most wonderful opportunity that anybody could have hoped for. And it went beyond my combat experience, because combat is one thing else, but having the opportunity to do flight testing was a whole new era. And there aren't too many of us. Out of the 500,000 pilots trained in World War II, only a few hundred of us ever got to fly all those different aircraft. Wright Field, Eglin Field, certain places in this country were obviously, and including the Navy people at Patuxent River and et cetera, China Lake. There are certain fields in the U.S. that were noted for having aircraft of all different kinds. And again, I can just feel that I was very fortunate to have ever had that opportunity.
Any other thoughts on training and all of that?
It's all the same.
Okay. So you finished with training. What was it like your first combat mission?
Well, China was a little bit different than any of the other theaters. We were flying P-40s, and we received 16 beat-up P-51s from Italy in 1944. And we had one guy in the squadron that had flown a P-51. He'd been an instructor in the States. And so these ferry pilots dropped these 16 airplanes off, and the next morning a Goonie bird picked them up. And I had ferried, I'd been in the hospital, and I had gone by our headquarters, and there was one of those P-51s there, and they said, take this out to the squadron. And that was my first flight in the P-51, and the crew chief showed me how to start it. And the next time I flew a 51 was 2 days later on a mission. And I couldn't even find the switches. And we blew half of the tail wheels on the first mission because we weren't used to locking tail wheels, and we took care of half of them on one flight. And so, I didn't get into a fight on the first mission, but the rest of the people, half of them did. We went out to 3 airfields and split, and the ones that went north were where the Japanese airplanes were, and I was in the south group. And then the next thing we hear, there's a big fight going on, and the Japanese had shot down 3 of our P-51s in the first outing, and I think it was as much as not knowing how to handle the airplane, and we didn't understand the gun sight, and so we just went in there blind, and so that's something I never forgot, thinking how nice it would have been to have had a thorough checkout in the airplane. They had a little OTU set up in Karachi, and we sat down there in the desert for 4 months waiting for P-51s, and they never showed up. And there were 3 old beat-up A-36s there from Italy. And this gentleman sitting here had beat them up in Italy. And so we each got 3 rides. We got to fly each one of those old airplanes, and that was our transition. And so it was sort of guessing by God.
Colonel Anderson, how were things in England when you went in there?
Crummy. We got into England in a similar matter. A trained unit in the United States flew P-39s and got to England, and we learned we're going to get the new P-51 Bravo, the one with the Merlin engine. We hadn't even seen one, let alone fly one. And I was very lucky. I went to the Royal Air Force Central Gunnery School, and they said, take a Mustang with you to go through that course. So I got 35 hours. A lot of people got, were lucky to get 1 or 2 flights in the Mustang. That's not to say that it was dangerous, really, but it would have been nicer to have a little bit of time in the airplane, because our guys averaged, 250 hours in fighters at least, and I probably had a total of maybe 800 hours and 400 or 500 hours in fighters. But England flying, we got into the 8th Air Force, and weather was a big factor in flying over there. Tactics and change of tactics was important in how we defeated the Luftwaffe. I could go on and on for hours here, but that's kind of how we got into it.
Then Colonel McGee over in Italy, how was it there?
My experience was rather interesting because I had just gotten over to the Philippines, and some of you may recall the Johnson Purge. They were cutting back on so many pilots still on active duty from World War II. And your question was on Italy or?
Yeah.
Not Korea, okay. My interest was, I wasn't one of those who said, I want to be a pilot. But it happens because of Army policy, the Army had said, we need black mechanics before we can have black pilots. And it happens that the mechanics who really were the first Tuskegee Airmen were trained at the technical school in Chanute Field, Rantoul, Illinois. Heard about the program. I was at the University of Illinois, and interest, and I guess my ROTC instructor said, well, you ought to sign up and be a pilot rather than a mechanic. I did take the exams and passed them and had to sit back and wait a few months to be called, and so I did enter the service in October of '42 as a cadet, Tuskegee Army Airfield.
Then, Jim, you actually began at Spitfires and then went to the P-51. Could you tell us about that?
Well, excuse me. I started out in Panama flying P-39s and P-40s. And going into North Africa, we had Spitfires for a while, but I never flew combat Spitfires. But from there into Italy, we had Mustangs. And the transition was, I didn't have the problem that these other guys had. I think I was a better pilot probably than Bud over here. Bud was one of the first guys in combat in Europe, by the way. And Bud Mahurin, all these, somebody has to go first, you know. And these guys were there before I was. But Italy was, we were 15th Air Force, escorting the bombers, B-24s and B-17s into Germany, same thing as Bud was doing. He was coming from England, we were coming from Italy. Second lieutenants, there were 18 of us, had joined the 31st Fighter Group. 14 of us came home. I think we did pretty well. You adapt yourselves very well to combat because you want to survive. But you sort of have to think about the guys who took you into combat first because they'd been there and they had a few ideas and you adapted yourself to that. And I did find out that I had more gunnery training than most of the guys had, and I knew what curve of pursuit was, and a lot of combat pilots didn't understand that. Bud Mahurin and Gabby Gabreski was in the war quite early, and they didn't know what curve of pursuit was. But they'd go right up behind the ME-109s or the 110s about 50 yards and blast them right out of the sky. That's the only kind of gunner they knew, but it was very effective. They had 8 caliber machine guns, 50 caliber machine guns. We had 4 to start out with, and we got 6, but the P-47s were well loaded with armament. But as I said before, somebody has to go first, and they went before.
Now, Ken, you were doing a little bit different kind of flying with the dive bombing with the A-36, and you actually began flying a P-40 off of a carrier, which is a pretty unique experience. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
My first assignment out of flight training was here at Washington Bowling Field, flying P-40s. We thought we were here, of course, to guard the Capitol, and we hoped that we were successful in doing that. Nobody attacked Washington while we were here. Anyway, we got orders to go to North Africa and pick up brand new P-40s from the factory, go to Norfolk, Virginia, and put them on board the USS Ranger. Actually, that was a quick way of getting aircraft overseas, and it was a very practical way. Although I think the Navy didn't really enjoy their role as being ferrying service for the Army Air Force. But 75 of us got on board the USS Ranger, and we got about 100 miles from Casablanca, and they launched us. And I was about number 35 in the pack, and there wasn't a single airplane ahead of me that I saw that flew off the carrier deck. Torque got, if anybody flying aircraft and fighters, the torque can be obviously significant, and every one of them went off the left side, and we thought, well, did he make it? And actually, they got down closer to the water, they got additional ground effect, lift, and every one of us that took off the carrier that morning made it to Casablanca. We got to Casablanca, and lo and behold, things changed. The 33rd Fighter Group in Tunisia had lost their P-40s on the ground due to Rommel's overrunning them with tanks. And so they're the only ones that had experience, of course. Our group of pilots that flew off the 75 airplanes, we had no combat experience at that point. And so, lo and behold, they took our airplanes, and we wondered what was going to happen to us next. Fortunately, we got a better airplane. The A-36 was a P-51A with dive brakes, and a whole group of those aircraft had been sent over by ship and were reassembled as necessary in Casablanca. And within a month's training at Fez, North Africa, we went on up to Tunisia. And the 27th Fighter Bomb Group was the first combat unit to fly the A-36. Actually, the A-36 was a great airplane, and with dive brakes, which we could stop and roll in at about 10, 12,000 feet. And the accuracy of our delivering bombs went to 500. The more vertical we would become, the more accurate, of course, our releasing the bombs on target. Actually, I always believe that our greatest success in using the airplane was the strafing. We shot beyond the bomb lines everything that moved, bicycles, motorcycles, trucks, whatever, and trains, but anything that moved was a clear target. I really believe that our efficiency and effectiveness was really accomplished by strafing. And one of my last missions in November of '43, I was leading a flight of 8 north of Rome, and we saw 3 SM-79s taxiing on the lake. And of course, every fighter pilot wants to shoot down an airplane, not on the ground, but in the air. And I saw those aircraft, and I let everybody know that we had to slow down and get in position, letting those aircraft get airborne so that we can shoot them down while they were airborne. Well, as luck would have it, not for us that day. We couldn't wait any longer, so we had to strafe them on the water. And so, of course, you can't become an ace when you shoot something down on the ground. So, but the airplane itself, the A-36, I got to fly later every model of the P-51 built by North American Aviation. And it was, in my mind, one of the finest airplanes of the war. And my assessment of fighters is, on my den, I have 3 airplanes that I valued as the best fighters: the P-51, the British Spitfire, and the Focke-Wulf 190. I got to fly all those aircraft and many others. So, but my judgment was those were the finest fighters of that period.
Now, Colonel Anderson, could you take us through what an average day was like when you flew an escort mission out of England?
Average day? In escorting the heavy bombers from England into Germany, average mission was about 4.5 hours. Actually, the longest mission I ever flew was 6 hours and 55 minutes. That's how much fuel that Mustang had. When I got back from that, it was on D-Day, and actually had another hour's worth of fuel left. So the bombers would go out. We would hear them taking off very, very early in the dark, and you'd know that the mission was going to go. And if you hadn't gotten up, they would wake you up, and you go have some breakfast and go to the briefing, figure out where you're going to go. Go back to the squadron, get your flight together, talk it over a little bit. We always flew in very large formations. And in training, I think I remember we were very lucky to get 4 ships up at one time. That was a big formation. Maybe you got 8 up. That was really, really big formation. But in England, from the day one that we started flying combat, we went out in 48 airplanes every day. with 2 spares behind you and trying to keep that together, fly through an overcast, rejoin up above, and then go on a mission. We lacked training in weather flying, in real weather flying, and we lacked training in flying in large formations. But somehow or other, when you're pumped up, I don't know, we got it done. And so you'd go out to your airplane, figure out where you were, you know, looking for the next airplane that you followed out. Everybody taxied out at the same time. One squadron on the runway, and the rest of them surrounded around the intersections and all that. Everybody took off in about 10-second intervals, 2 ships at a time. 2 or 3 circles around the field, and everybody was expected to get off and get with your squadron at least, and head out on course to rendezvous with the bombers. Generally, well, I don't know. Usually weather was a factor, and you had to climb up through this overcast, somewhat in formation, and then gather together again when you got up on top, head out for the bombers, join them someplace. Early in the business, we had a rotational system where we escorted them for a certain distance, and then somebody picked them up later. Later on, we picked them up and took them to the target and then all the way home. That's how good the Mustang was. We could go anywhere the bombers wanted to go. You took them in until, well, if I don't know whether it'd be a typical day or not, but if you got action wherever you were, let's see, it depended on whether it was early in the business or later on in the business. After Jimmy Doolittle got there, we changed tactics. First, we were told to stay with the bombers as close as you could. Fly around them. They wanted to see you. They liked that. And then when the enemy came in, we were to drive them away and then come back to the bombers. Go to 18,000 feet. If you hadn't shot them down, go back and escort the bombers. General Doolittle changed that tactic. I think it was in February or March of 1944. He was a different kind of a guy and saw it different. And he told us, when you engage the enemy now, you take them to the ground and kill them. And it changed the outlook. What we had to do was defeat the Luftwaffe first before we could really get back there and do all the bombing. Daylight bombing was in jeopardy because they took such heavy losses when they did not have escort. And then if you had combat, you did what you had to do. If you could get back together and get your flight, you went back up and found the bombers and took them out. Long way home, bring out stragglers, then get over the coast, let on down, and come home and debrief, and then go to the bar.
Colonel McGee, when you look back at individuals that you flew with, are there any particular aviators that stand out to you as special people?
Well, there are a number that probably would fall in that category, particularly, as was mentioned, every pilot would like to be an ace, but everyone didn't become an ace because of the nature of the missions, and as Bud had said, sticking close to the bombers in some cases, chasing the enemy away when you can, but remembering that protecting the B-17s and B-24s was the key issue of that time. And likewise, we put up 16 aircraft per squadron, flew out beside or above the bombers. Not like in the movies, you didn't fly through the bomber formation. You'd probably been pretty well pretty well shot up if you did that. But at that time, the names of those who were fighter aces, and we had some pilots that were pretty hot pilots, but we didn't have any that became aces. But that's a bit of history. We didn't know about them during the time that we were flying. And of course, we started our escort work with the P-47 Thunderbolt and then switched to the P-51 Mustang, which was a premier. Have to qualify that, though, P-51 Mustang with the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. The earlier ones had an Allison engine that didn't quite measure up, but it gave with the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, gave us an aircraft that could really do the job, as I always said, from the ground to 35,000 feet.
Colonel Kirkpatrick, you're at the end of a very long supply line. How did that impact your operations?
Well, the operation was patience. You had to hurry up and wait. The last 4 months I was in China, I did not fly a combat mission, and my squadron did not. And in the spring of 44, the Japanese decided they were going to take all of our forward bases. And they did that in about a period of 5 months. And so we got pushed out of any contact with the coast and up towards Shanghai. And also the Japanese had begun to pull airplanes out of China. And when we started to march through the islands, they put them out in the islands. And so it was so frustrating because you didn't know from one day to the next if you were going to have fuel or spark plugs or whatever you needed. And we stayed at this one base, which was about 150 miles inland from the major line of bases we had. And that was a place called Chikyang, and it had 4,000-foot crushed rock runway. And we stayed there until 45. We stayed there 8 months. And the Japanese finally decided that, well, those guys are still a thorn in our side. So they had to come over a range of mountains, but they finally decided to do that. And that's when they ran us back to a bare base. And there was no fuel, no spares, and they threw up some tents hastily. And we lost all of our kitchen equipment en route. And we were eating with chopsticks for a while until they found some more silverware or tinware, I guess it was. But it was just, you didn't know from one day to the next if you were going to fly or not fly. And that got a little wearisome towards the end. And we were reading about all these big missions in Europe and all that. And the biggest mission that was ever flown in China was 80-some airplanes, and that was one flight. And 24 of those were B-24s, 35 Mustangs, and 18 P-40s. And I was still flying P-40s in, and that was a raid on Hong Kong when a big supply ships were in there. And but you didn't really feel like you were accomplishing much. You go shoot up a couple of barges or a couple of trains, or we were doing mostly ground support stuff. And the Chinese were not known for their fighting skills on the ground anyway. And so the next day they would be gone, and you felt like you didn't accomplish much. So we called it the have-a-no war. If you ask a Chinaman, well, do you have this? And he say, have a no. And so that's, the Japanese, I think, picked that expression up later. But anyway, that's the way we felt, frustrated.
Major Brooks, when you think about the role of ground support and maintenance, can you talk about that a little bit, what it did for your unit?
Yeah, I'll have to take the fifth on that one. You want me to describe the ground support? What are you talking about?
What the maintainers did for enabling you guys to fly?
Oh, these guys were the crew chiefs and assistant crew.
That's my story.
Is that your story? These
both
guys,
tell it.
these guys, if it hadn't been for those guys, we couldn't have flown, of course. These were guys that had gone to school, and they were high school graduates just like we were. But they were professionals, and we were very fond of our crew chiefs and assistant crew chiefs. They're the first guys you saw in the mornings and the first guys you saw when you came back from your mission, so you kind of loved them. And in fact, I talked to my crew chief, ex-crew chief, who became an officer later on in career a few years ago before he died, and we had a nice conversation, and I was very fond of him. But those guys were very, very important to us. Don't ever forget that.
You have a story?
Can I tell a ground crew chief story?
Go for it.
I love to tell my story about my crew chiefs. I had a crew chief and an armor from day one, and when we got our P-39s and we trained in the United States. And Otto Heino was his name. And he stayed with me through the whole war. Think about it a little bit. If you were the crew chief of an airplane and your airplane went down for any reason, think about that a little bit. And now we're in England. These guys are not doing the dying or the fighting, but they're dedicated. World War II was a big deal, and they wanted to do their part. And the story I like to tell is when I came back on my second tour, my first tour I flew a B model Mustang with a solid camouflaged paint scheme. And I came back from my second tour, and my crew chief had been promoted to tech sergeant. It was a line chief, and he handpicked a new crew chief for me, and I still had my same armor. And of course, Otto would be there when I left, and he'd be there when I got back every day. And so this is, I had a D model on my second tour, and it was in camouflage, dark green. And in those days, we were not worrying too much about the paint schemes anymore. We were getting the raw, bare aluminum airplanes, and we had them in full silver, half and half paint schemes, and all camouflage. You see a picture of a World War II airplane. It was only good for that moment, perhaps. And this happened in November of 1944, and I knew I was going to finish in the winter somewhere sometime. And I was flying on a mission, and I looked down at 4 airplanes. We used to fly in a Finger 4. 2 of them were camouflaged, and 2 of them were silver. And I'm looking down on them, and the first big snow had hit Germany. Snow all over the ground. And well, which airplane stood out the most? The dark camouflaged airplane. And I came back to landed, my crew's standing there. They want to know what went on and all this stuff. And so I said, the airplane's fine, get it ready for tomorrow. Or, no, I didn't. I said, get it ready for tomorrow. By the way, whenever it's laid up for heavy maintenance, would you please de-paint it and put it in the silver paint scheme? And I put it to them on a proposition that it might save my butt tactically. I explained all that to them. But frankly, I thought the silver paint scheme was a little cooler. And so I went in, I was the operations officer, and I said, oh, I think I'll fly tomorrow. Put my name on the board, went home, came back in the morning, briefing and everything, grabbed my chute, walked out from operations up over the revetment, and I looked down at my airplane, and it's sitting there in gleaming aluminum. And these three guys were standing there at attention. I felt like a jerk. I said, what did they think? I gave them a direct order to depaint that thing overnight? I looked at their hands, and they'd used whatever they had, 145 grade fuel, rubbing it, scraping it, and getting it. Their hands were raw. And and then I thought about it a little bit, and I said, no, those guys did it because they wanted to do it. That was their contribution to the war. I can't say enough about the crew chiefs of the world and the guys we had in World War II. We had the greatest support from the home front. I can't remember being short anything in our theater.
Could I say a word about crew chiefs, too? In our experience, transitioning from P-39, P-40 to the P-47, P-51, we owe a great debt of gratitude to the dedication of the mechanics that made it possible. We didn't have hangars. It was out in the open. You didn't have time to go to school. You read the tech manuals and got your hands greasy. Good to talk to we pilots, but don't forget it was the mechanics that made it possible for us to do what we accomplished.
You gentlemen are very unique in that you have really transcended to the element of historical legend, and you guys are icons for an incredibly important career field. How do you want to be remembered? I mean, when people look at you and read about you, what are the things you want them to take away from your experiences? We'll start at this end of the table and work on down.
Well, I would just say, regardless of race, that we were dedicated Americans to supporting what our country is all about, and that's preserving the freedoms we all so much enjoy.
Well, I think in the past 3 or 4 years, there has been a shift in the population in this country with more of an appreciation of World War II. And it took a long time to erase Vietnam out of the mentality of a lot of people. But now it makes you feel good when someone comes up to you and slaps you on the back or wants to shake your hand and say thank you for your service. And that's all we expect. I mean, that's all I would expect. And it's very commonplace on airplanes and airports and shopping malls and everywhere you go. And I have a couple of stickers on my car, and people will see those and come up and run me down to thank me for my service. And that really gives you a warm, fuzzy feeling.
I think what I want to remember in my time here, the last 91 years on this great country we have, is that what a wonderful place we have had to live and to associate with people that we could admire. I met some most wonderful men in my life I've met in the military. They meant more to me than any others that I think I had a chance to associate otherwise. And having the chance to fly and participate in World War II was a service that I was proud of. And I think so many of us really felt that we didn't mind putting our life on the line. We didn't worry about being shot down or killed. We knew that it possibly would happen because it happens to somebody, but it was the most wonderful experience I think that any person can have to serve his country and be proud of it. Thank you.
Okay. James Cagney, was an old-time movie star. You may see him on the late movies. And he was retired in New Hampshire, Vermont, and was asked the question, how did you do all those things? And he said, well, we just did it. And I like to say our generation just did it.
We've all heard about the greatest generation, World War II. I think it sells books, stuff like that. World War II was probably the war we had to fight, and we really didn't have a choice, you know. But the young, you know, if you didn't, you were going to get drafted if you didn't go down and join, and most people rushed down and joined in droves because they wanted to pick, you know, the Navy or the Army or whatever. And I feel like we were just guys doing what you had to do. And also, there's a feeling, you know, that World War II was brilliantly planned and carried out with great excellence and things like that. We were screwed up just like we are today. Where do you think the acronym SNAFU came from? It was invented in World War II. And I'd like to say, I think we were all just a bunch of ordinary people just doing what we had to do. Thank you.
We have time for one or two questions. If I could grab the cards here. Question here about whether any of you ever flew against an ME-262.
Did what?
Flew against an ME-262?
262s. German jets. Really, in engaging them in aerial combat, if they used the proper tactics, there wasn't much you could do except go head on with them if you saw them in time. And they had 30 millimeters and we had 50 calibers, and a head-on pass is not something we want to do in that case. If they screwed up and tried to dogfight, the Mustang could eat them up. If they got slow, we could turn inside them, and if they tried to accelerate away, the propeller could stay with them in a short distance. So they had to keep their speed up, they had to hit and run to be accurate. Our group shot down 19 of them, most of them in the traffic pattern. My 262 story is got a little bit of humor in it. I don't want to eat up all the time on that. Oh, okay. We started getting them in the spring or late in '44, and like I say, they were got in the traffic pattern. I chased one a couple of times and couldn't catch him. And this day we were going out. This is pretty late in the mission, and still had our drop tanks, but I had plenty of fuel. And I see this black trail, 10,000 feet below me, coming straight 90 degrees to our path. And I said, if that guy keeps going, I'm going to get him. And I told my flight, get ready. Here's what we're going to do. When he just at the right time, I'm going to drop my tanks, roll up over on my back, descend on, looking up, down through the top of the canopy, and as he comes out, I'm going to roll out right under him and pull up and shoot him down, right? So I'm experienced now. I got a few kills. I know what I'm doing, right? So I said, okay, here we go, guys. You know, full power, full RPM, drop tanks now. I roll over on my back, and the engine quit. I had forgot to switch to the main tank. The propeller ran away. Well, I reached down, switched tanks, got the propeller under control. I'm coming down upside down, going down. I still think I can pull it off. And here I come down. He goes just straight and level, just going through there, roll out on him, pull my nose up and put the pipper on him. And I said, golly, he's a little bit out of range. I'll just I've been diving, you know, so I'm going really fast. I'll just wait a little bit. Well, he disappeared behind that pipper. That's how fast they were. That's my 262 story.
Please join me in thanking these gentlemen. We're truly honored to have you with us today.